welcome. I'm Kim Dupre, and I'm a systems coach with the Virginia Tiered Systems of Supports.
And I'm Anna Hebb, and I'm a VTSS systems coach as well as the LEA lead. And today we're just going to jump right in and get started with what is VTSS. And we would like to really talk about a good working definition. Our goal at VTSS is really to align academic, behavior, and social emotional wellness into that single decision-making framework. This framework holds a continuum of supports and evidence-based practices with increasing levels of intensity. We want to create an effective learning environment for all students. We work with divisions across the Commonwealth to integrate evidence-based practices using their context, their data, so they are making informed decisions. It's really a systemic approach. Decisions that not only support SEL practices, as you see here, but also we need to remember to support our staff. What is our professional learning around SEL? Time allowed, resources, and how about our coaching system? We want to ultimately look at our outcomes. Did we get what we had hoped to get? We always look at our outcomes not only for our staff, but our students, our families, and the community we serve. So when we ask, did we get the intended outcomes we had hoped for, we're making this a continuous work. We look at our data again, examine our practices, and is there something within the system that needs more support? That is our framework. So how do we integrate SEL so it's not just another initiative? This begins to tell the story of our framework, and Kim will share with you specifically how are schools and divisions integrating SEL into the VTSS framework. Kim?
Thank you. And as Anna just mentioned, VTSS is a systemic approach, and we like to say that a lot so people really understand that it's not really one more thing. And I always like to simplify things. So the way that I kind of think about it is it's a framework that's going to help with the way that you approach what you're doing in your systems around academics, around your behavior, and around your mental wellness for students. And since SEL is designed to promote positive academic and behavioral outcomes for students, it's often seen as a very important practice of universal approaches within VTSS. So it fits perfectly. So how do we do that if VTSS is the framework? Well, we organize that into 3 tiers, and those 3 tiers are designed to support that whole child, which in turn means equitable practices for all. And an SEL approach that encompasses all 3 tiers, and you can see in the slide here, you can kind of see how we've broken it down with our academics, our PBIS, restorative, trauma, because we really want you to start seeing those connections. So SEL is going to encompass all 3 tiers, just like the other things I just told you, so you can continually start seeing the same way of work. And it's really the most effective and sustainable way that we can implement. So when we use a tier 1 approach, SEL really becomes a priority for all students and staff. And if we see that 20% of our students are at risk through our data, then we know we're going to really implement those universal instructional practices. So at tier 2, we're going to use our data to identify those small groups, those lessons. And those lessons with social emotional learning, they're going to focus on emotional regulation, relationship building, decision making, positive self-conflict, concept, conflict resolution. Those are some of the areas that you might see that are happening at your tier 2. And these are also things that you're going to reinforce with your students in that classroom setting so that students continually receive that continuum support in every setting. And then we're also going to look at our tier 3. So when students aren't showing improvement with our tier 2 interventions, then we're going to move them into tier 3 intensive support. And those tier 3 interventions that support our SEL can be focused more on identifying how to control those emotions, identifying your emotions as a whole, things that we don't often talk about in schools with our students, we're going to start talking about deeply. They also can involve a more structured problem solving skills or interventions that support more active listening. Most importantly, at all 3 levels, schools are going to use data to inform their decisions around those curriculums and those supports for our students. When you're thinking about integrating and using a framework such as VTSS, the divisions in schools that have the most success are the ones who use a process for integration and are very thoughtful of how they put their systems together. This is where at VTSS, we call it our essential elements of our framework. And I'm going to go through those with you. And they are first our aligned organizational structure. So when you're thinking of that, we're thinking of the whole of how our organization functions, how we're bringing everything together. What are the outcomes that we're expecting? How are we communicating that? What are those systems that are required to make an impact? These key concepts have application across all of your contexts: academics, behavior, mental wellness. I hope we're saying that enough for you. Then we have our data-informed decision-making, which is also another essential component of VTSS. We're going to use our data to match the student needs or level for need. We just showed you that with our tiers. And then we're going to use that data for interventions or instruction. And one way we can do this, one way that we talk about that when it comes to social emotional learning, is by unpacking our school climate data. That is really good data to show you what's going on in your climate of your school. This data is going to highlight those social emotional wellness pieces and will show you which pieces and where they're at risk. So when we think about SEL, we're going to use an approach to support success and bring those interconnected data informed lenses. And we're going to start shifting our focus. Most of the time we have that singular focus on our academics lens and really start looking at a broader lens. And as I say that, I also know that there's a lot of data out there and we need to be able to organize that data around what we're doing and what we're doing well, where we want to continue to improve, and where we're making progress. Then we're going to move into our evidence-based practices. Our job at VTSS and as coaches is really to help divisions and schools resist that temptation to add new practices or new curriculums without first considering what you already have. And the previous slide that Anna showed you is another good way that we call resource mapping. So kind of looking at what you already have in place and how you're mapping those and what you're doing well, what's not working, just like what we said in data-informed decision-making. And we know through this resource mapping whether or not the team needs an evidence-based practice. And if the team decides that you do need an evidence-based practice, then you're using some sort of selection tool to decide how you're going to implement that practice. Then we have our family, school, and community partnerships. As we have said, VTSS requires a strategic systemic approach, and that involves everyone, your division and school leaders, your community partners, your family members working together to make sure that our students are receiving the best support that they can. Then we're going to move into our monitoring student progress. And if we're looking at our school climate data, for example, as I said earlier, are we seeing growth for all of our students? How do we know that we're seeing growth? How are we measuring this growth? And are you comparing this data to other data, such as your achievement data, your attendance data, and your discipline data? And then you want to look at how are you integrating this into other teams' data. We want to work smarter, not harder. So we want to start connecting those systems. So it's not seen, again, as one more thing. And are you getting input from all stakeholders? And then finally, we're going to want to evaluate our outcomes and fidelity. And Anna said this beautifully earlier. Did we do what we said we were going to do? This is going to help us to see where, as a system, we need to perhaps make some changes or what we're doing really well and what we need to do better to implement VTSS for all of our students in SEL. So finally, integration of SEL is going to begin in the general education classroom. That is where the research says you get the biggest bang for your buck. And this is going to ensure that all students have access to the instruction and that they're in place where they feel safe and supported. And social emotional learning is an important part of universal practices within VTSS because it promotes positive academic and behavior outcomes for all students.
Thank you, Kim. We thank you for watching our video, and we wish you all the best of luck as you begin to integrate SEL within your work.